Can you dive in a little bit more into how do you understand underlying emotional needs? Or you mentioned that's connected to nonviolent communication. Can you talk about both of those and maybe what that looks like?
Absolutely. Nonviolent communication was a toolkit developed by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who was involved in integrating schools in the American South following kind of the end of the Jim Crow era. So there were a lot of very tense situations and a lot of folks who were entrenched in position and, frankly, having deep seated emotional challenges that appear as very harsh and critical positions and interests. And so digging deeper into the underlying emotional needs and working with folks to be vulnerable with each other was key to being successful in Dr. Rosenberg's mission there. And so nonviolent communication comes from that space. And it is a very kind of practical set of tools that, frankly, if you're following by the book, can come across as a sort of therapy jargon, right? So at its highest level, you're essentially following a 4-step process, which are observation, feeling, need, and request. So observation, I see that you're feeling a little upset. Feeling, can you share why you might be feeling a little upset, right? Um, Need, what is it that you're missing that is causing you to feel upset? And request, how can I help meet that need? How can I give whatever is missing so that you no longer feel upset? And a large part of it is going to be developing tools for developing a vocabulary of emotions and needs that is well beyond what we learn in kindergarten, right? I mean, I use the word upset just now to cover, upset, frankly, is nowhere near nuanced enough to have a meaningful conversation around. But it's a starting point by which you can dig deeper and say, are you feeling upset perhaps because you have an unmet need to be respected by your peers, or an unmet need to have interesting, challenging technical debates? And some people do have needs to have interesting, challenging technical debates. And some people have needs to not debate the same thing over and over again and just get the job done. And so digging in deeper and understanding each individual's needs based in part on their personalities and goals and just diversity of characteristics in that way can help us work together more closely.
I love that framework so much. The thing I jump to, or where I probably feel like the most nervous or scared about, is like trying to understand somebody's unmet need or like asking them about that. And so, can you speak a little more about that? About how to identify somebody's unmet emotional need, or how to like ask them about that in a way that doesn't seem either patronizing or invasive, in a way I guess that feels like authentic and curious, and that like helps move that conversation forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is to be non-judgmental. Um, that is really the if nonviolent communication has anything to it, it's non-judgmentalness, right? That is the violence in question, which is a very extreme interpretation of the word violence, certainly to an American audience. But it's the objective saying, hey, you're not wrong. I'm not going to use language that suggests that you are wrong. I am going to use language that suggests that I am curious. Um, and it really begins with a statement of observation. So I'm not asking how you're feeling. I'm essentially saying, I hear you raise your voice. I see that your fists are clenched. And then you can move on to an empathy guess. Might you be feeling a little angry? Might you be feeling a little frustrated? And you pause and let folks respond. And usually, when you ask people about their emotions, they're going to be honest with you. And I think that for a lot of people, depending on the environment that we grew up in and the culture of our families, that may not be something that we're used to. But I think if you extend empathy to someone else, and sometimes it takes being a little vulnerable first to make it happen, right? I sense you're feeling frustrated. I get frustrated sometimes too. Or this situation is really ticking me off, and I can imagine why that might be true for you too. Can go a long way towards building that rapport and encouraging people to be vulnerable with their emotions.
There's a book, one of my favorite leadership book all time is Fred Kaufman's Conscious Business. In that book, he defines a few type of emotions and what leads to those emotions underneath, and also talk about how do you handle emotions when you're in conversation at work. So one thing I remember learned and applied right away, and it's effective, is that when you have a conversation with someone, if emotion rise up, the first thing you need to do is to just acknowledge that. In the same way that there's no they're not judgmental. Like, you shouldn't feel sad or shouldn't feel angry because you can start to explain. That never works. You first, because emotion is emotion. So if people have certain emotion, that's a fact. You need to acknowledge that. I think that's the start of conversation that sort of related to the framework that Jordan described, at least in the first step.
That's an amazing point. And a lot of people can feel shame about their emotions because of past historical experiences or cultural differences. And it's really important to encourage people to move past that shame and be vulnerable. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to be vulnerable first.